In suburban Lynbrook, Long Island, 1984, life seemed ordinary. Teenagers walked home from work without fear. Parents called their children in for dinner. The streets were quiet, predictable, safe. Theresa Fusco, 16, was one of those teenagers. She worked at the local roller skating rink, laughed with friends, and dreamed of a future that felt endless. On the evening of November 10, she left work just as she had countless times before, unaware that this ordinary night would mark the beginning of a decades-long nightmare. Weeks later, her body was discovered in a wooded area, hidden beneath a blanket of leaves. She had been raped and murdered, a life stolen in a place that should have been safe. Her family's grief was immediate, her community shaken, and the trail of questions began. Questions that would remain unanswered for 41 years. The calm, suburban world that Theresa knew had been shattered in an instant. And one question lingered above all. How could a life so ordinary, so promising, be extinguished so violently, and why did it take more than 4 decades for justice to reach her? Stay with this story, because the truth, when it finally emerged, would shock everyone and prove that persistence, science, and a single overlooked clue can rewrite decades of uncertainty. Theresa Fusco was 16, full of life, and full of promise. The youngest of her family, she was adored by her parents, Thomas and Anne Fusco, who worked tirelessly to provide her with a stable, loving home. Theresa attended school diligently, balanced her studies with extracurricular activities, and spent afternoons working at the local roller skating rink. There, she earned her own money, joking with coworkers and helping younger kids lace up their skates, the laughter of the rink blending with the rhythm of her everyday life. Life in Lynbrook, Long Island in 1984 seemed ordinary. Quiet streets, kids on bikes, parents waving from front porches. The town hummed with routine, dogs barked from yards, radios played from open windows, the distant roar of traffic punctuated the calm. Evenings were predictable. Teenagers walked home, families settled in for dinner, and no one imagined that a young girl could vanish from these streets unnoticed. Theresa's world was bright and vibrant. She dreamed beyond her neighborhood, college, independence, small adventures with friends, weekends at local diners, evenings roller skating under the rink's neon lights. Friends remembered her laugh, her quick smile, the way she could make anyone feel seen. She had a warmth and energy that drew people in, and a curiosity that made ordinary days feel memorable. On the evening of November 10, she clocked out of her shift at the rink, chatted briefly with friends about weekend plans, and began walking the familiar streets she had traversed countless times. The air was crisp, the sidewalks worn smooth from daily footsteps. Streetlights flickered along her path, casting long shadows. To anyone watching, she seemed like any other teenager, unaware that her ordinary life was about to be torn apart. She passed the corner store where neighbors often stopped to gossip, waved to a familiar face watering a garden, and hummed quietly to herself. Beneath the calm, danger lurked, unseen and unpredictable. It would soon shatter Theresa's world forever. Her laughter, her routines, her sense of security, all ordinary elements that masked the fragility of life in ways no one could anticipate. The world she knew, filled with friends, family, and daily rhythms, would vanish in a single, brutal night. And the streets that had always felt safe would soon echo with questions, grief, and the haunting silence left in her absence. The investigation into Theresa Fusco's murder began in the cold aftermath of November 1984, with officers combing the streets, interviewing neighbors, and documenting every detail at the crime scene. But with the forensic tools of the time, the trail quickly ran cold. Fingerprints, fibers, and witness accounts offered little concrete evidence, and the case soon became mired in uncertainty. In the late 1980s, 3 men were arrested and eventually convicted of Theresa's murder. At the time, prosecutors presented circumstantial evidence and testimony that seemed convincing. The town of Lynbrook, desperate for justice, watched the trials closely. For the families, it felt like closure, but doubts lingered. Questions that could not be answered by the evidence continued to hover. Had the right men been convicted? Could justice truly be served so quickly in a case so complex? Decades passed, and the convicted men maintained their innocence. Advances in DNA technology in the 1990s and early 2000s offered new hope. By 2003, a cold case review revealed that the DNA from evidence at the scene did not match the 3 men. They were exonerated, their convictions overturned, and the state eventually paid settlements for the wrongful imprisonment, 2 men receiving nearly $18 million combined. Yet the real perpetrator remained at large, free, and anonymous, a shadow over the Fusco family that lasted 41 years. Throughout the intervening decades, investigators revisited the case multiple times. Cold case units re-examined the crime scene evidence, looking for overlooked clues. Every item preserved, clothing, fibers, and objects near the body, was scrutinized. Officers retraced the paths Theresa might have taken that night, revisited witness accounts, and sought to reconstruct the timeline more precisely. The investigation was painstaking and methodical, constrained by decades-old records and fading memories. The breakthrough finally came in 2024. A DNA sample collected from a discarded smoothie cup and straw, something seemingly innocuous and unrelated, was matched to the DNA found on Theresa's body. The genetic profile pointed to Richard Bilodeau, now 63 years old and living in Center Moriches, New York. Detectives confirmed his presence in Lynbrook at the time of the murder and began building a case against him. Tracking Bilodeau involved piecing together decades of sparse evidence, old addresses, employment history, and corroborating witness statements. Investigators also examined his prior interactions in the area, any criminal history, and patterns that could link him to the crime. Every small lead became crucial, as a single mistake could derail a prosecution built on 41-year-old evidence. Meanwhile, the Fusco family endured the limbo of cold case frustration. Each reopening of the investigation offered hope, then disappointment, as leads ran dry. The community remained haunted by unanswered questions, not just who committed the murder, but how the wrong convictions had gone unchallenged for decades, and why justice had taken so long. Finally, after the DNA match was confirmed, law enforcement coordinated to arrest Bilodeau. Surveillance, background checks, and careful planning ensured the suspect could be apprehended safely and that the evidence trail was secure. The arrest brought a mix of relief and tension. The man had been identified, but the legal battle was just beginning. The investigation demonstrated the limits of technology in 1984 and the perseverance required to overcome decades of uncertainty. What had once seemed unsolvable, a murder shrouded in ambiguity, was finally unraveling, piece by painstaking piece. After more than 40 years, the case that had haunted Lynbrook was finally reaching a turning point. In 2024, investigators made the breakthrough that no one could have predicted. A DNA match from a discarded smoothie cup and straw linked directly to Richard Bilodeau, the man who had eluded justice for decades. Bilodeau, now 63 and living quietly in Center Moriches, New York, had spent 41 years under the radar. But the cold case detectives, using modern forensic science, traced his DNA to the biological evidence collected from Theresa Fusco's body. The discovery was both shocking and methodical. Decades of unanswered questions were suddenly pointing to a single, undeniable source. The arrest was carefully coordinated. Law enforcement confirmed his identity, cross-checked his whereabouts in 1984, and documented every connection to the crime scene. When officers confronted Bilodeau, he was taken into custody without incident. The indictment charged Bilodeau with intentional murder and murder during the commission of rape. He pleaded not guilty, claiming innocence, but the DNA evidence was overwhelming. Prosecutors presented the evidence meticulously, showing that this was the same man whose genetic profile had been found at the scene, linking him unequivocally to Theresa's murder. This twist, that a decades-old murder could finally be solved with a discarded straw, stunned not only the Fusco family, but also the community. It also raised haunting questions. How many other cold cases could be solved if overlooked evidence were re-examined? How many innocent men were wrongly convicted before the truth emerged? For the Fusco family, the revelation was bittersweet. Justice had finally found a face, a name, and a path toward accountability. But after 41 years of waiting, the wound of loss remained deep. After decades of uncertainty and the wrongful convictions of 3 men, the real perpetrator had finally been identified, a testament to the tireless pursuit of justice, the advancement of science, and the refusal to let a cold case remain unsolved. What drives a man to commit a brutal murder and then evade justice for over 4 decades? In the case of Theresa Fusco, the answer lies in a combination of opportunity, predation, and careful concealment. Richard Bilodeau, now 63, was living a quiet, unassuming life, but the evidence from 1984 paints a different picture. A man capable of calculated violence, capable of planning, and capable of hiding in plain sight. Bilodeau's actions on the night of November 10 reveal key traits of predatory behavior. He selected a victim in a familiar, unsuspecting environment, followed her routine, and struck when the opportunity arose. This level of planning indicates a mind accustomed to control and aware of consequences, a criminal who understood how to avoid detection, exploiting both the limits of 1980s forensic technology and the assumptions of a trusting community. Psychologists note that offenders like Bilodeau often exhibit traits of predatory aggression, combining impulsive violence with methodical planning. In cold case murders, this mix allows perpetrators to blend into society for decades. His ability to remain undetected demonstrates not just cunning, but also a calculated patience, a willingness to let time dilute evidence while escaping scrutiny. The exoneration of the 3 wrongfully convicted men further highlights the cunning of Bilodeau. While investigators focused on circumstantial evidence and eyewitness accounts, the real perpetrator remained unchallenged, waiting for an opportunity to be identified by advances in DNA technology. This speaks to both his strategic avoidance of suspicion and the tragic consequences of investigative limitations at the time. From a psychological perspective, Bilodeau's behavior underscores the danger of opportunistic offenders, those who strike when circumstances align perfectly, exploit systemic gaps, and anticipate investigative weaknesses. He was not a man driven by emotion or spontaneous rage. He was calculated, patient, and methodical, traits that allowed a murder to go unsolved for 41 years. Understanding his mind reframes the story. This was never a random act of violence. It was the deliberate selection of a vulnerable target, executed with precision and concealed through careful avoidance of detection. It is the anatomy of a predator, one whose methods remind us that justice often relies not only on human vigilance, but also on scientific progress. As we move toward the final module, consider this. What does this case teach us about vigilance, evidence preservation, and the patience required for justice to catch up with a criminal mind willing to wait decades? For 41 years, Theresa Fusco's family lived with unanswered questions, grief, and the haunting uncertainty of not knowing who had taken their daughter. Her father, Thomas Fusco, attended the 2025 arraignment, a moment decades in the making. The man who had eluded justice for so long, Richard Bilodeau, was finally facing charges, intentional murder and murder during the commission of rape. The wrongful convictions of 3 men in the 1980s had added layers of pain and injustice. 2 of the exonerated men received nearly $18 million in settlements, but no amount of money could restore the lost years or the trust shaken in the investigative system. Bilodeau's indictment marked a long-awaited victory for science and perseverance. Modern DNA analysis had finally revealed the truth, linking him unequivocally to Theresa's murder through a discarded smoothie cup and straw. Law enforcement and the cold case unit demonstrated that even decades-old evidence, preserved carefully, could unlock a path to accountability. The Fusco family, while finally seeing a suspect brought to justice, still confronts the pain of what was lost. The memory of Theresa, her laughter, her youthful dreams, her ordinary routines, remains vivid, a stark contrast to the violence that entered her life. The case serves as a sobering reminder of both the fragility of life and the resilience of those who refuse to let injustice stand. The killer has been found, and justice is finally moving forward, but one question remains unanswered. What small oversight, missed warning, or lost piece of evidence allowed this tragedy to remain unsolved for 41 years? Could it have been prevented? If this story moved you, give it a like, share it to raise awareness, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to follow more real-life true crime cases.